Hey guys, tonight we ease into one of those seemingly glamorous stories that when you scratch at the surface turns out to be way messier, smellier, and funnier than you'd expect. We're going to talk about purple. Not the soothing violet glow of LED lights on your desk, but the real deal. Tyrian purple, the dye that ancient Rome treasured so much, it practically bankrupted itself for a splash of color on a toga. Imagine yourself standing by the Mediterranean Sea, warm salt air on your skin, and then bam, you're hit with the overpowering stench of rotting shellfish, because that's where purple was born. You probably won't survive this without wrinkling your nose, but don't worry, it's only in your imagination. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you, because I love picturing all of us scattered across the world, drifting off to the same story in different time zones. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a rocky Phoenician shoreline, sandals grinding against shells, waves licking at your ankles. The sun is warm, but the smell, oh, the smell, is like someone left fish stew out for a week and then tried to cover it with incense. This is the birthplace of Tyrian purple, a dye so precious that emperors wrap themselves in it like armor made of color. But it doesn't come from flowers or berries. No, it oozes from tiny glands of sea snails. You picture yourself crouched in the surf, collecting thousands of little murex snails, each smaller than your palm, their spiral shells glistening with salt. To stain even one hem of fabric, it might take 10,000 of these creatures. Talk about overkill for fashion. Historians still argue whether the dye was first discovered by accident. Maybe fishermen noticed their nets stained purple after crushing snails, or if it was a slow, deliberate process developed by coastal communities. One quirky legend says Hercules' dog invented the shade after chewing on a snail and coming back with a purple muzzle. You have to love the idea of divine fashion inspiration coming from a slobbery pup. Imagine being a god looking at your dog's messy face and thinking, yes, this shall be the badge of kings. The truth, though, is much less glamorous. You watch laborers haul baskets of snails from the sea, their back-bent muscles straining. The catch is dumped into vats, then smashed open with stones. Inside each snail is a tiny gland holding the precursor of the dye, a slimy, milky substance that only turns purple after exposure to air and sunlight. You wince at the crunch, the ooze, the mingling smell of brine and rot. This is not luxury. This is drudgery masked as wealth. As the substance ferments, the air around the workshop grows heavy. You picture yourself gagging, holding your tunic over your nose. Ancient writers actually commented on the stench, saying whole neighborhoods reeked of it. The irony. The worse the smell, the more prestigious the cloth it produced. You laugh to yourself, imagine buying a luxury car today that came with the scent of a garbage truck as proof of authenticity. That was Tyrian purple. The process wasn't quick either. Workers had to soak, boil, and dry the fabrics, dipping them again and again until the shade deepened to that rich, royal hue. At first, the color looked greenish or yellow, gradually shifting through red until finally it glowed with that deep violet shimmer under the sun. You lean closer in your mind, watching the cloth change color like a magic trick, except the magician smells like a dead fish stall. And yet, despite the smell, the filth, the sheer snail body, Count Rome couldn't get enough of this dye. Why? Because purple wasn't just pretty. It was power stitched into fabric. You picture senators with their tunics edged in purple stripes. Emperors in robes so soaked with dye, they looked like they had bled royalty. This wasn't about fashion. It was about reminding everyone who ruled, who mattered, who could literally afford to drape themselves in thousands of crushed snails while the rest of you smelled like olive oil and sweat. Now here's a mainstream fact to tuck under your pillow. Tyrian purple was so expensive that ounce for ounce, it cost more than gold. Some sources claim a pound of the dyed wool was worth 20 times a laborer's annual wage. That means you could buy a small estate or one toga trim. Choices, choices. You imagine yourself pockets empty, gazing at a shop stall with one little purple scarf, priced higher than your entire life savings. You'd probably settle for beige. But here's the quirky flip side. Archaeologists have found ancient imitations, cheap dyes, mixed to look vaguely purplish, sold to people who wanted the status without the snail massacre. Think of it as the knockoff handbag of its day. Some people probably strutted around Rome in suspiciously muddy purples, hoping no one noticed. Of course, if a senator spotted you faking it, the embarrassment could last longer than the dye. And it's not just status. Purple seeped into religion too. Priests draped statues of gods in purple robes, as if even Jupiter needed to dress on trend. You imagine priests muttering prayers while fussing with drapery smoothing wrinkles, making sure the god's hemline looked appropriately divine. Historians still argue whether this was genuine reverence or just another display of Rome flexing wealth at the heavens. Either way, if you ever doubted the connection between fashion and power, remember that even marble deities got purple makeovers. Your footsteps in this imagined stroll crunch along the beach again. You picture the dye pits glowing in the sunset vats lined up like cauldrons in some wizard's workshop. Workers stir with long sticks, sweat pouring down their faces. The dye splashes, staining their hands, their tunics, even their hair. Unlike senators, these laborers wore purple unwillingly, their bodies branded by the very substance that lifted others into luxury. It's a cruel cosmic joke, you stink, you labor, and you wear purple stains as scars while the emperor wears them as glory. As night falls in your mind's journey, you sit on the rocks and watch the waves crash. You think about how many snails died for the robe of one man, reclining in a marble hall, sipping watered wine, gesturing lazily at his attendants. You chuckle softly. If reincarnation is real, may none of us come back as dye snails. Unless, of course, you enjoy being squashed in the name of Fashion Week Roman edition. But you also marvel a little. For all the absurdity, the waste, the stench, the snail goo, this was human determination at its peak. We took a slimy secretion and turned it into the badge of empires. You wonder, is that ingenuity, or is it just stubborn vanity dressed in shellfish perfume? Historians still argue whether the pursuit of purple reflected Rome's technological brilliance or its obsession with hierarchy. Maybe it's both. You lie back now in your mind's eye, staring at the stars over the Mediterranean. The sea smells awful, but the breeze is cool, the constellations sharp. Somewhere nearby, a laborer is still stirring a vat, still enduring the stink for a wage that barely buys bread. Somewhere else, a senator's tailor is trimming a toga with a stripe that says, "Don't you dare sit in my chair." And tomorrow, the cycle repeats, more snails, more vats, more purple. And you drifting here with me, realize that even something as simple as a color can carry the weight of power, privilege, and pain. You close your eyes and the purple of the night sky above you seems softer. Freer, not pressed from shells, but simply painted by stars. You roll over on that scratchy mat in your imagination, the faint smell of straw still clinging to your thoughts. And when you open your eyes again, it's morning in ancient Rome. Not a quiet, sleepy morning, but one bustling with the chatter of markets, the clatter of carts, and the shouts of merchants hawking their wares. Somewhere above the din, you spot a flash of that coveted purple, bright enough to slice through the haze of dust and smoke. It's not just cloth, it's a signal, a glowing neon sign that says, "Power walks here." You tug your tunic tighter and follow it. This morning, it's not about where purple came from, but who gets to wear it. Spoiler alert, not you. Unless you've suddenly developed a talent for conquering provinces, or you're married to someone sitting on the Senate floor. Purple is off limits. Rome didn't just love purple, it policed it. Laws called sumptuary laws regulated who could swaddle themselves in this dye. You imagine the city like a giant fashion show where the emperor himself is the ultimate gatekeeper, wagging his finger at anyone bold enough to try purple without permission. Historians still argue whether these laws were consistently enforced, or more symbolic like scarecrows that worked just by existing. Some evidence suggests you'd be in real trouble if you strutted down the Via Sacra in a fully purple toga without rank. Others think most people wouldn't dare anyway, because the price alone kept it safely out of reach. Either way, purple was essentially a membership card to the highest club in town. If you didn't earn it, you weren't getting in. You trail behind a senator now, eyes on the stripe of Tyrian purple edging his white toga. It's called the laticlave, a broadband stitched with meaning. To anyone else, it might just look like fancy trim, but to Romans it shouts, "Here walks authority." You notice how people part slightly in the street, giving him space, their gazes lingering a little longer. Even the way he gestures seems amplified by the stripe. Isn't it wild you think how a few inches of color can make people step aside as if the cloth itself carries lightning? And then, of course, there are the emperors. They didn't settle for stripes. They drowned themselves in purple. Entire robes, entire cloaks, saturated with snail-born magnificence. The more purple, the more power radiated from their skin. One quirky tidbit. You'll like the phrase, "born in the purple," comes later from Byzantium, where imperial children were literally born in rooms lined with purple stone, wrapped in purple cloth. Imagine growing up swaddled in snail goo couture before you could even crawl. Talk about high-maintenance baby showers. But here's the thing. Purple wasn't just a flex. It was dangerous. Wearing too much of it, or wearing it without permission, could actually get you killed. Emperors guarded their monopoly on purple with paranoia that would put modern copyright lawyers to shame. One emperor, Aurelian, reportedly executed his wife's maid for daring to own a purple garment. Another banned his own wife from buying a cloak dyed in the deepest shade, saying it cost more than its weight in gold. You chuckle darkly, imagine dying over a coat. Somewhere in history, someone literally did. Historians still argue whether this jealousy over purple was about protecting the economy of dye production, or about raw symbolism. Was it about money, or about fear that anyone else might shine too brightly? You picture an emperor scowling at a banquet side-eyeing some ambitious senator's toga, and thinking, that purple is 2 shades too bold. Off with his head. It's fashion policing at its most lethal. And here's a mainstream fact to tuck into your mental pocket. The toga picta, the fully purple toga embroidered with gold, was reserved for generals during triumphs and for emperors. Imagine the parade armies marching prisoners of war, dragged behind musicians blaring, and at the center, one man gleaming like a human jewel, swathed in violet and gold thread. You wonder if anyone in the crowd actually admired him, or if they were too busy shielding their eyes from the sheer extravagance. The toga picta wasn't just clothing, it was theater. Yet the irony gnaws at you. You remember those laborers on the shore? Their hands stained their tunics, ruined their lungs full of stench. The people who made purple never wore it except by accident. Meanwhile, senators strutted, emperors paraded, and gods were dressed like runway models. It's the same story over and over, the sweat of the many draped across the shoulders of the few. And Rome wanted everyone to see it. Purple wasn't designed to be subtle. It was meant to blaze like a flare across a crowd, a color that declared, I'm rare, I'm costly, I'm untouchable. As you stroll through the imagined streets, you catch sight of a child running past in a tunic with a thin purple stripe, the praetexta reserved for the sons of senators. You can't help but smile at the absurdity. Here's a kid who probably spends his afternoons throwing figs at walls, yet his clothing already carries authority you'll never have. Even children wore the badge of privilege before they learned their multiplication tables. You mutter under your breath, "Nice stripe, kid. Did you earn it?" The child doesn't answer. He's too busy trying to catch a pigeon. Then there's the quirky side again. Not every purple was equal. There were shades, some redder, some bluer, some deeper, some paler. The richest, most saturated hues were the most guarded. Cheaper versions existed mixed with madder or indigo, but these were considered knockoffs. You imagine a Roman fashion critic sniffing disdainfully at a toga. Oh, darling, that's more eggplant than imperial violet. How embarrassing. The politics of pigment ran deeper than most gossip. Your path takes you to the Forum now, where magistrates sit in their striped togas issuing rulings. Their garments act like uniforms, telling the crowd who holds what rank. The stripes are code's visible authority stitched in fabric. Rome didn't rely only on words or titles. It draped power across the body, so no one could miss it. You wonder, isn't that still true today? We dress for authority, for respect, for recognition. Swap the snail dye for designer labels, and the psychology hasn't changed much. Historians still argue whether purple's power was more psychological or practical. Was it really about controlling appearances? Or was it a way to stabilize society by creating visible markers of hierarchy? You lean against a column in your mind's eye, listening to the arguments of scholars long dead, and think, maybe it doesn't matter. The result was the same purple kept Rome stratified one hemline at a time. As dusk settles, you imagine standing outside the emperor's palace, where guards flank the gates in plain armor, while inside, courtiers swirl in fabrics edged with color. The closer you get to the center of power, the deeper the shade of purple becomes, until finally, the emperor himself sits on a throne, radiant, a walking declaration of dominance. You take a breath, imagining the sheer spectacle. And then with a smirk, you remind yourself at the end of the day, he's still just a guy in snail juice pajamas. The night grows cooler. The streets quiet down, but the purple lingers in your vision like after images from staring at the sun. You think about how much fear, jealousy, and reverence this one color commanded. You think about the laws, the executions, the parades, the children with their stripes, and you realize purple wasn't just rare, it was weaponized. A color turned into a chain-binding society as tightly as iron shackles. You sigh, settle onto your straw mat once again in this mental journey, and let your eyes close. Somewhere a senator adjusts his toga, an emperor scowls at a rival's shade, and a laborer by the sea smashes another snail shell under his hand. And tomorrow, like always, purple will rule. You blink into another Roman morning, and this time your gaze doesn't fix on the senators with their purple stripes or the emperors glowing like violet suns. It drifts lower toward the bustling markets and workshops where the fabric itself is woven. Before purple becomes law, before it drapes emperors, it begins as threads on a loom, spun by hands that belong neither to kings nor philosophers, but to workers whose names never made it into marble. You walk among them, ears full of the clack of looms, eyes full of color. And for once, you notice that purple is not alone on the palette. The textile trade in Rome is humming like a hive. In one corner, spinners twist wool, their fingers flying with practiced ease. In another, dyers stir vats that steam like cauldrons of witches. Though instead of frogs, an eye of newt, its pigments ground from roots plants, and the famous murex shells. You stand close enough to catch a whiff of the dye house, and let me warn you, your nose would rather you didn't. Historians still argue whether dye houses were pushed to the edges of towns because of their stench, or if that's just modern imagination. But when you inhale that sharp, brainy, almost sour smell, you decide maybe the ancients knew a thing or two about city planning. Mainstream fact here, purple wasn't the only prized color. Deep reds from madder root blues, from indigo yellows, from saffron, all found their way into Roman wardrobes. The trick was combining them. A toga wasn't just white cloth. Depending on the season and the wearer's rank, it could carry stripes, borders, even embroidered scenes. You watch as a weaver deftly inlays a stripe of purple into an otherwise white wool length, her shuttle clicking back and forth like a heartbeat. It's mechanical, repetitive, but strangely soothing. Almost like listening to the hum of your fan when you're trying to fall asleep. Quirky tidbit. Some Romans believed that wearing certain colors could influence mood or even destiny. Red for energy, green for fertility, white for purity. You imagine a Roman teenager arguing with their mother, but all the cool kids are wearing saffron tunics. Mom, to which the mother probably replied, "Fine, but if you stain it with garum sauce, I'm not washing it." Funny how fashion arguments don't change much across millennia. But back to purple, because you can't escape it. You peer into a vat, the surface dark and swirling, and see threads being dipped, pulled out, and strung up to dry. The transformation is mesmerizing. At first, the cloth looks dull, almost gray, but as the air hits it, the color deepens into that rich, otherworldly violet. It's like magic or alchemy, if you prefer. The workers don't gasp at the miracle. To them, it's routine. But you do, because you know each strand carries the labor of dozens of snails crushed and boiled their lives, siphoned into pigment. You wrinkle your nose, half in awe, half in disgust. Historians still argue whether textile workers themselves felt pride in handling purple, or if it was just another messy job. Some think they must have recognized its value, maybe even stolen scraps when no one was looking. Others think they were too weighed down by monotony and stink to care. You standing in the corner watching a young boy sweep up snail shells with a wooden rake, lean toward the second opinion. Pride doesn't pay for sandals. The economy of purple threads through every layer of society. Wealthy patrons commission garments not only to show off their money, but to reinforce political alliances. You watch as a merchant counts coins into a weaver's hand, insisting the border of his wife's stola gleam with the deepest shade available. She, standing nearby in a russet tunic, looks unimpressed. Maybe she wanted blue. Fashion is rarely about what we want. It's about what status demands. And while the rich haggle over shade, you slip into the stalls selling cheaper dyes. Here bolts of cloth glow in saffron yellow, a shade so bright it feels like bottled sunlight. Indigo tunics hang neatly folded their blues, deep as twilight. Wool dyed in madder root blushes a rusty red. You trail your hand across them, feeling the texture scratchy, heavy, unmistakably wool. There's no silk yet in your Roman market, not for the average buyer anyway. That's still trickling in along the Silk Road, exotic and scandalous. You hear one vendor whisper about its softness, calling it effeminate. The Roman Senate once debated banning silk altogether, worried it made men too delicate. You can't help but laugh. Imagine fearing fabric. Clearly, no one in Rome ever tried napping with a silk pillowcase. As you wander deeper, you catch sight of enslaved workers hauling amphorae filled with dye ingredients. Their tunics are stained, permanently streaked with violet crimson and indigo, as if the work itself tattooed them. Their bodies are anonymous, but their clothes scream of their trade. And here's the cruel irony: the color that makes emperors godlike marks workers as lowly. The same purple that crowns power brands servitude when it stains the wrong hands. You feel the sting of the paradox. Rome wove status into every thread, quirky detail to lighten it. Romans sometimes used urine as a mordant, a fixer to bind dye to fabric. That's right. Public urinals weren't just for relieving yourself, they were also part of the clothing industry. Workers collected the liquid, carted it to dye houses, and stirred it into vats. You grimace, imagining the smell, then chuckle. Next time someone tells you they got their shirt vintage washed, you can remind them it could have been worse. Way worse. Historians still argue whether purple truly dominated the Roman fashion scene, or if that's hindsight exaggeration. Some evidence suggests that in everyday life, most people just wore undyed wool, plain and practical, with colored trim reserved for special occasions. Others argue purple was so tied to identity that even small stripes carried huge social weight. You lean back against a stall, picturing the forum filled with people in mostly beige and white, the occasional stripe flashing like a warning beacon. Maybe Rome was less like a rainbow and more like grayscale, punctuated by bursts of imperial purple. The day wanes and you step into a workshop where embroiderers bend over their work. Tiny needles prick through cloth, laying gold thread into patterns, laurel wreaths, eagle wings, lightning bolts. These motifs shout Roman values, victory, divinity, might. When paired with purple cloth, they amplify the symbolism until the garment practically glows with authority. You picture a general strutting in one of these, every stitch whispering, "Don't mess with me." It's subtle and gaudy at the same time, the Roman specialty. Evening falls and the market quiets. Workers douse torches. Dogs sniff at scraps, and the smell of dye clings in your nostrils. You return to your mat eyes buzzing with color. Purple dominates your memory, but you also carry saffron yellow, indigo blue, madder red. You realize Rome's fashion wasn't monochrome. It was a conversation of hues stitched together into a hierarchy of meaning. The rich flaunted purple, but everyone else stitched their lives in whatever colors they could afford, hoping maybe, just maybe, a brighter tunic might brighten a harder day. You stretch out straw, scratching your back, and think about how threads and dye, mundane as they seem, tied into power, economy, and identity. Tomorrow someone will spin, someone will dye, someone will wear. And purple will keep its place, rare, guarded, both beautiful and cruel. You stir awake with the memory of dyes still lingering in your nose, but today the story threads itself beyond markets and vats, straight into the laws that decide who gets to wear what. You probably thought fashion police were a modern invention with their glossy magazines and red carpet critics. But no, Rome had its own version. Except instead of snide comments, they had actual legislation. And unlike a disapproving glance from a stylist here, a slip in your wardrobe could cost you fines, confiscation, or in some cases, your dignity. You stretch into the day and picture the scene, Rome's streets alive with the shuffle of sandals. Cloaks thrown over shoulders, tunics tied at the waist. It looks casual enough, but each piece of clothing is a signal carefully calibrated. You're not free to throw on saffron just because it flatters your skin tone. No clothing in Rome operates like a coded message, and the code is enforced with rules. Some you know instinctively, like don't show up in the Senate House without a toga if you're a citizen, but others are scribbled in decrees and customs. Historians still argue whether these sumptuary laws were enforced strictly, or if they mostly existed as ideals constantly ignored. But one thing's clear: purple, especially the richest Tyrian dye, was policed harder than any other. The mainstream fact here: emperors gradually reserved full purple garments for themselves, marking it as the fabric of sovereignty. Senators had to settle for a stripe, a broad band of purple called the latus clavus, stitched down the front of their toga. Knights lower in rank wore a narrower stripe, the angustus clavus. Even the width of your stripe shouted your social standing. It's as if your clothes were shouting upper management or middle manager to everyone passing by. Imagine trying to sneak into a Senate meeting wearing the wrong stripe. Not only would people notice, they'd probably haul you out by your elbow faster than you could mutter laundry mix-up. But clothing laws weren't only about purple. A quirky tidbit: Roman women weren't supposed to wear the toga at all. It was reserved for men. If a woman was spotted in one, it could mark her as questionable, and not in the edgy fashion sense. Prostitutes were sometimes forced to wear togas as a sign of status inversion. So when you see a woman in a stola, that long draping gown, it's not just fashion, it's a declaration of respectability. Clothing was less wardrobe and more paperwork, something you wore to prove you belonged. You walk through the forum now, scanning the crowd, and notice how easily the laws ripple through the fabric of daily life. A young boy wears a toga with a crimson border, the toga praetexta, signaling his youth and protected status. Magistrates wear the same to show their authority. Freedmen, not quite full citizens, often stick to simpler tunics, sometimes belted, sometimes plain, careful not to appear above their station. And then there's you wondering if your modern hoodie would have been outlawed as too comfortable for dignity. Historians still argue whether the enforcement of these clothing codes was about maintaining morality or just reinforcing the class system. Some think it was Rome's way of keeping the visual hierarchy clean, making sure everyone knew their place at a glance. Others suspect it was more about showing off, with the laws used selectively to shame anyone who got too flashy without the pedigree to back it up. You lean toward the second. After all, isn't half of fashion just competitive showing off disguised as tradition? You imagine a scenario: a merchant grows rich from trade and struts through the streets in a deep purple cloak, feeling invincible. Citizens glance sideways, muttering. An official confronts him, sneering. That shade's not for you. He stammers, protests, maybe even slips a bribe. But the message is loud and clear. Wealth alone can't buy status. In Rome, the dye is more than color. It's permission. And permission is always political. There's humor buried here too, though. Picture some poor worker accidentally splashing himself with purple dye at the vats. He trudges home, his tunic blotched, and suddenly people are staring as if he's declaring himself emperor. You can almost hear his exasperated sigh. Relax, it's laundry day, not treason. That's the trouble with fashion, as law accidents become statements whether you intend them or not. The deeper irony is how laws tried to restrain extravagance, yet extravagance always found loopholes. If purple cloth was banned in full, wealthy Romans turned to embroidery, gold thread trims, exotic fabrics like silk. Senators might not be able to drown themselves in purple, but they could certainly shimmer in ways that screamed luxury. You think of it like kids at school, uniformed into plain polos. Somehow one always finds a way to flaunt branded sneakers or the fanciest backpack. Human nature, eternal. By midday, the sun beats down on the stone piazzas, and you wander past a crowd gathering for a festival. The laws here are even more on display. Priests wear distinctive garments marked with purple stripes, and the sacrificial attendants shuffle in simple tunics. Everyone knows their role before a single word is spoken. Purple is authority. Plain cloth is obedience. You sip imaginary watered wine in the shade and can't help but note, in a world where even your hemline speaks silence isn't always an option. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some Romans believed clothing had to breathe moral character into its wearer. A senator in a frayed toga was said to dishonor the republic, as if shabby wool could unravel civic virtue. That's like blaming democracy's decline on someone's wrinkled blazer. And yet, in a city obsessed with appearances, maybe it made sense. If power is theater, the costume must be flawless. Historians still argue whether these clothing laws genuinely stabilized Rome, or whether they were window dressing for deeper inequalities. Did stripes and hems keep people in their lanes? Or did everyone just play along until the next upheaval? You watch the crowd, senators strutting with broad stripes, knights with narrow ones, commoners in plain tunics, and you realize maybe it worked because everyone believed in it. Belief is the strongest fabric of all. The day tilts toward evening, and you imagine yourself back in the quarters, straw poking at your skin mind, replaying the costumes of the city. You think about your own closet hoodies, jeans, socks that don't match, and laugh quietly. Rome would have fined you on sight. But as you drift, you can't help but feel the weight of fabric laws. To wear purple in Rome wasn't just fashion. It was a declaration of power, and one stitch out of place could turn a life upside down. And tomorrow, you'll follow that fabric into the heart of politics, where emperors wielded purple like a weapon, and one cloak could silence rivals better than a sword. For now, though, you let the hum of Roman fabric codes fade into the quiet of your own breathing. Each exhale smoothing the edges of your thoughts like a loom weaving the night. You blink awake with the lingering scent of incense from last night's musings, still faint in your nose. And today the purple thread winds you into politics where fabric and power become indistinguishable. If the last section showed you how stripes and hems marked out status, this one shows you how a single cloak could sway loyalty, topple rivals, or legitimize emperors. Forget debates, forget ballots. Rome wrapped its authority quite literally in cloth. And if you dared to drape yourself in the wrong shade, you weren't just committing a fashion faux pas. You were staging a coup. Imagine it, the forum bustling with voices, marble gleaming in the sun, and all eyes turning as someone appears in a cloak of pure Tyrian purple. That wasn't just a sartorial choice, it was a thunderclap. Purple had grown so tightly bound to sovereignty that only the emperor himself could command it fully. Historians still argue whether Augustus was the first to restrict its use, or whether he simply codified what had already become custom. But the outcome was the same. Purple was no longer just dye. It was destiny in textile form. Mainstream fact, by the time of the late Empire laws decreed that only the emperor could wear a completely purple garment known as the toga picta, or sometimes a full purple cloak. Generals during triumphs borrowed it, but always as a temporary performance, the cloth returning afterward to the state treasury. It's as if the garment itself contained a political charge, and handing it back kept the charge from blowing up the system. For everyone else, even wealthy senators' purple was rationed to stripes, trims, or borders. You could own land, you could command legions, but unless the emperor handed you purple, your authority looked unfinished. Picture a general newly victorious striding into Rome with his soldiers chanting his name. He's honored with a triumph, granted the right to wear purple just for the day. The crowd gasps at the spectacle, but the symbolism is delicate. Everyone knows the general will remove it when the parade ends. Because if he doesn't, if he lingers in that fabric too long, he's making a claim to rule. And Rome has never been shy about crushing ambition. You laugh softly at the irony emperors had to worry, not just about armies and assassins, but about wardrobes. The purple cloak was both armor and bullseye. When emperors gifted fragments of purple cloth to allies, it wasn't generosity. It was a calculated display of who was in the circle of power. And when rivals were accused of wearing it without sanction, it was evidence enough for treason. Forget espionage networks. Rome could sniff out conspiracy in someone's laundry basket. Here's a quirky tidbit. According to one story, a man named Aelius Sianus, confidant of Emperor Tiberius, was rumored to have stockpiled purple garments as part of his plan to rise higher. People whispered about trunks filled with forbidden dye. When his plot unraveled, the garments themselves became incriminating textiles as smoking guns. Historians still argue whether he truly hoarded the cloth or whether rivals exaggerated the story to paint him as power-hungry. Either way, it shows how deeply color had become politics. You wander through a mental reconstruction of the Senate House. Now rows of men in white togas striped with purple bands. Each stripe announces rank, but your eye keeps drifting toward the absent figure of the emperor. His seat, his authority, his singular purple mantle outweighs all those stripes combined. You think of modern parliaments with ties, suits, microphones, but none of those accessories can match the thunder of one robe dictating life or death. The power of purple wasn't only in politics, it seeped into religion too. Vestments for high priests sometimes included purple accents, deliberately echoing the emperor's divine authority. To worship in purple was to remind everyone that the gods and the state wove the same cloth. You imagine standing in a temple incense, curling upward the statue of Jupiter, glinting with gold, and the priest's robe flashing purple at the hem. It's not just fashion, it's ideology stitched with thread. Quirky tidbit number 2. Some emperors got so paranoid about purple that they banned not only the dye, but even certain shades that resembled it. Imagine being punished for your cloak being too close to eggplant. Fashion faux pas turned into criminal cases. You might groan, it's just plum, but to the wrong ears, that was conspiracy in disguise. Historians still argue whether these restrictions were truly enforced or simply symbolic, with most citizens too intimidated to test them anyway. Did soldiers really rip purple-dyed cloaks off merchants? Or did the fear of accusation keep people cautious without constant policing? The answer is slippery, but the paranoia was real. Purple wasn't just expensive, it was dangerous. You picture the court's now dusty halls where accusations ring out. He wore a purple mantle, someone declares, and gasps ripple through the chamber. Evidence, motive, all secondary to fabric. a bolt of cloth becomes Exhibit A in a case of treason. You chuckle softly. It's like convicting someone today for having too many crown emojis in their text messages. Yet in Rome, clothing wasn't metaphor. It was law, power, and punishment all at once, as dusk falls in your imagined stroll. You think about how strange it must have felt to live in a world where clothing carried lethal implications. For most, purple was untouchable, a symbol admired from afar. For the emperor, it was both shield and shackle protection and paranoia. The very cloth that elevated him also isolated him, making every rival's glance at his robe a potential dagger. And for you drifting off to the hum of thought, the lesson weaves itself clearly in Rome. Power wasn't always about swords or speeches. Sometimes it was about fabric and the costly, shimmering, dangerous threads that told the world who was allowed to rule. Tomorrow you'll trace how these politics spilled into the emperor's household itself, shaping what wives, children, and courtiers could wear. But for now, you let the purple fade into twilight, the forum dissolving into quiet, your breath softening like fabric, folding into the night. You stretch your shoulders, still stiff, from the endless parade of emperors in their shimmering cloaks. And tonight, your attention turns toward the people who made sure that purple stayed guarded like treasure. The empire was no stranger to laws, but when those laws reached all the way into the folds of your tunic, you start to realize how seriously Rome took appearances. Welcome to the world of fabric crimes, where your clothing could get you exiled, fined, or if you were really unlucky, executed. Forget missing a dress code at school. In Rome, the stakes were a little higher. The Romans loved their sumptuary laws, rules that told people what they could and couldn't wear, eat, or even display at banquets. These laws were less about morality and more about control. Purple, of course, sat right at the center of this web. By the time the empire hit its stride, the rules were crystal clear. Senators got their stripes, equestrians had narrower ones, and emperors alone were permitted the full blaze of Tyrian purple. To overstep that line was to declare yourself something you weren't. And Rome had very little patience for pretenders. Picture a young nobleman at a banquet dressed just a little too boldly, the hem of his cloak suspiciously wide with purple. Guests glance at one another, eyebrows raised. Is he ambitious, careless, suicidal? A single extra finger's width of dyed cloth could be interpreted as an insult to the emperor himself. You can almost hear the whispers, the rustling, as guests shift uncomfortably. It's not just fabric, it's a social earthquake wrapped around someone's shoulders. Mainstream fact, the Emperor Nero famously declared that only he could wear pure purple, and anyone else caught in it faced death. This wasn't just fashion pettiness, it was a political firewall. Nero feared rivals wrapping themselves in the same aura of divine authority. And Rome, well, Rome knew the difference between purple and not purple like a hawk knows the twitch of prey. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some ancient writers mention entire shops and markets being raided because their stalls carried forbidden cloth. Imagine imperial inspectors storming through stalls like medieval fashion police, tugging bolts of cloth from shelves and scrutinizing them in the sunlight. Was the shade too rich? Too close to the emperor's exclusive hue, you wouldn't want to argue the difference between mulberry and plum with a soldier holding a sword. Historians still argue whether these crackdowns were widespread or mostly symbolic. Some evidence suggests they were mainly reserved for elites who posed a threat rather than common folks dabbling in expensive dye. Others think the laws created a culture of constant fear, where even minor traders kept their wares dull to avoid suspicion. Either way, the result was the same purple remained a color you admired from afar, not one you casually draped across your shoulders. Now imagine the humiliation of being caught. Public punishment was part of the performance. You'd be stripped of the offending garment in front of a crowd, your wealth and status suddenly naked without its shimmering disguise. Some were fined, some exiled, and some, especially under paranoid emperors, paid with their lives. You almost chuckle at the absurdity, all this over a cloak. But the laughter fades quickly when you remember that in Rome, clothing wasn't surface. It was essence, identity, allegiance. Think of the theater of enforcement. A wealthy matron accused of flaunting a purple-dyed veil dragged into court, while the veil itself is held up like damning evidence. A senator scolded by rivals for letting his tunic stripes accidentally widen beyond regulation. These trials weren't about justice, they were about boundaries. Rome's power wasn't just military, it was sartorial, woven into the very threads of society. And then there's the irony. While emperors hoarded purple, they also indulged in gifting small fragments of it to favored allies. A strip of cloth, a sliver of hem, a purple-dyed belt tokens that announced loyalty as much as luxury. You might smirk, thinking it's like someone today handing out personalized hoodies to their closest friends. Except in this case, wearing the hoodie meant you were tied irrevocably to imperial favor. To wear it without permission meant you were tied to a stake. Quirky tidbit number 2. One satirist jokes about women smuggling cheaper purple imitations into their wardrobes, dyeing fabrics with mixtures of madder and indigo to mimic the prized Tyrian shade. You can imagine the quiet satisfaction of flaunting almost purple at a dinner party, winking as others wondered whether you were daring or simply cheap. Historians still argue whether these knockoff colors were widespread or just clever literary exaggerations. But the thought of Rome plagued with fake purple scandals is almost too funny to resist. You wander in your imagination through a Roman courtroom. Now the praetor seated in judgment. Slaves fanning away the summer heat. A man kneels, cloak bundled in his arms as evidence. The crowd murmurs, weighing whether the dye on that fabric is truly Tyrian or a lesser shade. Can you picture the absurdity of experts squinting at cloth, debating whether a snail's secretion crossed into forbidden territory, and yet lives hinged on these arguments? A wrong verdict, and someone's head rolled. The paranoia grew worse under emperors who leaned toward the dramatic. Caracalla, for example, supposedly ordered death for anyone daring to wear a cloak too close to imperial purple. It's as if the dye itself was radioactive dangerous unless carefully contained by imperial decree. To Rome, purple wasn't just a color, it was a crown you could wear. And crowns Rome believed should never multiply. Think too of the psychological toll. If you were wealthy, you lived with constant temptation. Bolts of purple shimmered in markets forbidden, yet dazzling. Owning one could raise your prestige, but it could also put your entire family at risk. To resist was prudence. To indulge was rebellion. It was a test of loyalty woven into every feast, every festival, every glance at your wardrobe, and yet people still tried. Because humans are stubborn creatures, and fabric can be intoxicating. You smile faintly because you've seen it before, that hunger for status, that willingness to risk everything for one shimmering display. In Rome, purple was more than pigment. It was temptation incarnate. As night settles in your story, the forum fades into shadows. You hear distant laughter, maybe from nobles still awake, whispering about who wore what at the latest banquet. You can almost picture the gossip. Did you see his cloak? Too bold, too dangerous. In Rome, fashion was politics, and politics, as always, was deadly serious. And so you drift amused and uneasy all at once, with the thought that sometimes survival wasn't about bravery or conquest. It was about choosing the right shade of fabric and knowing when not to shine too brightly. The empire's laws wrapped its people as tightly as any toga binding them in rules where seams could mean salvation or doom. Tomorrow you'll step out into the stalls of the markets themselves, where counterfeit purples and desperate traders tried to skirt these laws. But for now, you let the imagined rustle of fabric lull you each thread of law and punishment, weaving into a quiet blanket. Sleep comes like a cloak, not of purple but of soft gray, safe and unseen. You ease back into the story, and now the lamps of the villa give way to the flickering torches of the marketplace. The laws may have kept purple tightly guarded, but commerce, like water, always finds a crack in the wall. If the emperor said purple was exclusive, then naturally that only made the appetite greater. Tonight you find yourself wandering through Rome's bustling stalls, where bolts of cloth lie stacked high, where dye sellers shout their wares, and where the line between legal trade and forbidden contraband grows paper thin. The first thing you notice is the noise. Merchants bellow prices. Jugglers draw crowds. Beggars cry out for coins, and the scent of roasting chestnuts mixes with the acrid tang of fresh dyed wool. You sidestep a donkey cart and almost collide with a boy carrying amphorae. He gives you a look that says he's already done with the day, though it's only midday. But your attention catches on the fabric stalls, where cloth flutters like banners in a windless room, and the gleam of color is enough to make you pause. Mainstream fact, the Roman market was a global hub with goods flowing in from Syria, Egypt, Gaul, and beyond. Fabrics carried whispers of their origins from Egyptian linen to Gallic wool. And among these threads, the faintest suggestion of purple could set hearts racing. Even the tiniest stripe of the prized dye could inflate prices beyond reason. You lean in at one stall where a trader gestures eagerly to a folded tunic. He insists it's dyed with the genuine secretion of murex snails, harvested from Phoenician shores. He unrolls it dramatically, and you almost laugh because the shade is closer to muddy plum than radiant purple. But he swears it will deepen in color with wear. You imagine someone showing up at a banquet in this knockoff and either being mocked or worse, being mistaken for daring imperial colors. Both outcomes equally dangerous. Quirky tidbits, some texts mention merchants deliberately mixing cheaper dyes with tiny flecks of real murex purple, creating what you might call the fast fashion version of antiquity. The seller could claim authenticity, while customers could boast of owning something rare, even if their cloak faded within months to a dull brown. You can almost see a Roman influencer of the day strutting in their half-purple tunic, hoping no one noticed the dye bleeding onto their sandals. Historians still argue whether counterfeit purple was widespread, or whether most citizens simply avoided the risk. Some believe entire networks thrived on selling shadow purple fabric, tinted with cheaper substitutes, but marketed with sly winks. Others think the fear of imperial crackdowns kept such trade too risky for large operations. What seems certain is that the allure of purple was strong enough to inspire trickery, no matter the danger. Now you shift your gaze to another corner of the market, where dyers squat near vats bubbling with strange brews. The smell is horrific, fishy, metallic, and sharp enough to sting your eyes. A dyer dips a length of wool into the liquid and hauls it out steaming and dripping the color, shifting as it cools. You watch the faces of onlookers mesmerized by the transformation. Dyeing wasn't just chemistry, it was theater. And the audience perhaps dreamed of fabrics beyond their reach. One man sidles up to you muttering low. He offers a secret stash of cloth hidden behind his stall. His words drip with conspiracy. Imported directly from Tyre, touched by the sea god himself. You're tempted to peek, but you also know the danger. The law wasn't shy about punishing buyers as well as sellers. One wrong purchase, and you could find yourself in chains. You shake your head, smiling faintly at the absurdity of being afraid of fabric. But in Rome, fabric could kill. Think about the small-scale risks, too. Families might try to dye their own tunics at home with berries, or roots producing colors that hinted faintly at purple. Children would parade around proudly, while parents kept anxious eyes on neighbors who might report them for overstepping. You can picture it, a mother scolding her son for boasting too loudly, yanking him back inside before the wrong ear catches his bragging. In Rome, pride in clothing was a dangerous game. The debates among scholars make you chuckle again. Some argue that purple-dyed fabrics were so closely guarded that most people never even saw true Tyrian purple in their lifetimes. Others counter that it was common enough among elites that its brilliance was well known, if unattainable. You imagine yourself drifting between the stalls, squinting at swatches in the fading light, wondering if what you're seeing is real counterfeit or simply wishful thinking. And then there's the smuggling. Merchants from Phoenicia or Carthage sometimes carried contraband cloth hidden in amphorae beneath olive oil or stuffed into crates of figs. Guards might intercept them dragging out sodden bundles of purple, while crowds jeered or gasped. But for every shipment caught, countless others slipped through. Rome's appetite for purple created its own underground economy, a trade as shadowy as it was lucrative. Quirky tidbit number 2, one tale, tells of a dog discovering purple by accident, trailing through discarded shells on the Phoenician shore and staining its muzzle with the dye. You grin at the thought of merchants later spinning this myth into advertising. Even the gods' hounds approve this color. Maybe some traders in Rome repeated the story, embellishing it as they sold scraps of cloth with the price of a small farm. You pause near a fountain, watching women dip fabrics in water to test the fastness of dyes. Some colors run immediately, turning the fountain purple-gray. Others hold firm. You can hear the debates among them. Real Tyrian never fades, one insists. Another laughs, pointing out that even emperors have to re-dye their cloaks eventually. The crowd is filled with skepticism, longing, and resignation. Purple is both everywhere and nowhere at once. Now let yourself imagine being a humble dyer. Your hands are permanently stained. Your nose filled with the reek of vats. You earn little, risk much, and know that the most precious version of your craft, the imperial purple, is beyond your reach. You can reproduce reds, blues, even blends that look impressive in candlelight. But the real thing that's reserved for palaces, temples, and men who could order your execution with a wave of their hand. And yet, you still take pride. Even in imitation, there's artistry. Even in failure, there's color. And perhaps the secret truth is that purple's power lay not only in the dye itself, but in the mystique surrounding it, the way people whispered, feared, desired, and risked everything for it. The markets weren't just places of commerce. They were arenas where ambition met fabric, where status was draped across shoulders, and where the empire's hierarchy shimmered in every thread. As you drift deeper into the scene, you notice the torches burn lower. The stalls begin to close, bolts of cloth wrapped carefully dyes, covered against the night air. The last deals are whispered coins clinking faintly. You hear laughter from a group of youths, mocking the idea of purple as though it were nothing but pomp. But behind the mockery lies envy, the kind that lingers even after the laughter fades. So you settle in the shadows of the Forum, listening to the city quiet, the marketplace emptying. purple still glimmers faintly in your mind's eye, a phantom color both everywhere and untouchable. And as sleep begins to brush against your thoughts, you realize that Rome's laws couldn't truly contain desire. They could only police its shimmer, while the markets hummed endlessly with whispers, bargains, and forbidden dreams. You drift now from the markets back into the inner halls of Rome's great households, where purple takes on a new kind of weight. If in the market stalls it was contraband, a thing whispered about, then, here within polished atriums and marble-clad triclinia, it becomes spectacle. You find yourself stepping across mosaic floors, the hum of conversation echoing in high ceilings, the scent of roasted lamb wafting from the kitchen. And everywhere woven into curtains, stitched into cushions, draped across tunics, the sly, shimmering reminder of power purple. The first thing you notice is how calculated it all is. Nothing in the elite household is accidental. The master reclines on a couch during dinner parties, his mantle lined with a band of rich Tyrian dye. It's not a full swath, only the emperor dares that, but a border along the edge, just enough to whisper, I have wealth, I have connections, I can afford a color that costs more than your villa. You carrying trays of wine, feel the weight of that silent boast with every glance. Mainstream fact in Roman households, the triclinium was the stage for politics as much as for eating. Guests didn't just share food. They judged, they whispered, they ranked one another by the glint of jewelry, the richness of fabrics, the size of the wine cups. Purple became part of that stagecraft, a subtle prop in the endless play of status. At one feast, you watch as a senator's wife sweeps into the room with a tunic dyed in hues so deep they seem almost black in the lamplight. Gasps ripple through the room, guests murmuring admiration or envy. You almost stumble as you carry amphorae because the air thickens with a strange tension. It's not just about fabric anymore, it's about proximity to imperial favor. Who, after all, dares wear so much purple without approval? The fabric speaks volumes without anyone opening their mouths. Quirky tidbits some wealthy families even dyed their household furnishings. Pillows, draperies, even the coverings of litters used to carry them through the streets. Imagine being carted to the baths, shaded beneath cloth the price of a war horse. To citizens, it was the height of indulgence. To slaves hauling that litter, it was an itchy burden and one more reminder of a world tilted against you. Historians still argue whether domestic slaves felt awe or resentment when serving amid such luxury. Some argue the spectacle inspired loyalty, a sense of being part of greatness. Others insist it only sharpened the bitterness of inequality. You pouring wine into silver cups, know the truth lies somewhere in between. The color dazzles even as it mocks you. You slip away from the banquet to the quieter spaces of the household. In storerooms, folded garments lie stacked, some edged in purple bands, others dyed in cheaper hues. You brush your hand over the cloth and feel the softness, the slight oiliness that clings to true Murex purple. The overseer snaps at you to move faster, and you jerk your hand back, but not before you've stolen a moment to wonder what it would feel like to wear it yourself. Elsewhere in the villa, purple surfaces again in subtle ways. On the statue of a household god, a tiny sash dyed faintly violet. On the hem of a child's tunic, a delicate stripe meant to echo the father's grandeur. Even in miniature, the dye marks ownership, heritage, status. It's not just clothing. It's a genealogy, a visual claim to belonging among Rome's elite. Imagine the paranoia that comes with such display. A neighbor wears a mantle slightly deeper in color, and suddenly gossip brews, does he have better connections to Tyre? Is he currying favor with the emperor? A guest notices your mistress's tunic, looking faded, and whispers spread that her family's fortunes are slipping. Purple is currency, but it depreciates as fast as gossip spreads. Quirky tidbit number 2. There are stories of Romans deliberately leaving tunics in the sun to test the dye's staying power, boasting that real Tyrian does not fade. You chuckle at the image of senators squinting over laundry lines, muttering about color fastness like grumpy tailors. Yet in a world where fabric doubled as political armor, such paranoia makes perfect sense. In the kitchens, you hear servants trading jokes under their breath. One mocks a guest who draped himself in purple so heavy it dragged across the floor, comparing him to a beetle stuck on its back. Another whispers that purple dye smells of rotting shellfish, accurate if you've ever been near the vats, and wonders aloud if that stink clings to the wearers. You laugh quietly, careful not to be overheard. Even in oppression, humor leaks through. Later, you glimpse the master in his private study. He unrolls account scrolls, tallying the cost of imports, wine, olive oil, grain, and of course, dyes. His stylus scratches nervously, for even a senator worries about maintaining appearances. A single feast with dull tunics and rivals will pounce. Purple is an endless expense, a treadmill of consumption. You realize watching him frown over numbers that even the wealthy are slaves of sorts, bound to the tyranny of fashion and politics, chained by the very colors they flaunt. Historians still argue whether purple truly bankrupted families, or whether the expense was exaggerated. Some claim senators ruined themselves trying to keep up with imperial standards. Others suggest the dye, while costly, was manageable for those with estates and slaves. But standing here watching your master rub his temples, you see how the fear of being outshone weighs heavier than the actual expense. Purple costs money, yes, but it costs peace of mind even more. You recall one particular evening when a guest dared to wear a tunic almost indistinguishable from imperial purple. The room fell silent, then erupted in nervous laughter. Your master smiled thinly, but his jaw clenched. Later, you overheard him muttering about reporting the man to the authorities. Was it envy? Was it genuine fear of imperial wrath spilling onto his household? You'll never know. But that night, you scrubbed purple-stained wine from the marble floor with trembling hands, aware that one color could ignite suspicion, jealousy, and ruin all in one. At times, though, the spectacle takes on a lighter edge. You recall the laughter of children playing in miniature togas, smearing their tunics with grape juice to mimic purple giggling as they declared themselves little emperors. Their mothers scolded, but even you couldn't help but smile. It was innocent, silly, and also strangely telling. Even the youngest understood the symbolism. Purple wasn't just dye. It was identity aspiration theater. As the night wanes, the feast ends, and you and the other servants clean the remnants. Wine-soaked cloths, broken cups, garlands wilting on the floor. You carry trays back to the kitchen, muscles aching, while the elite drift off to beds stuffed with feathers, their purple mantles folded carefully beside them. You wonder if they dream of the same color that haunts your waking hours, and in the quiet, you think about the irony. Purple was supposed to mark leisure, luxury, divine favor. But for you, it marked more work, heavier trays, longer nights, stricter oversight. For the masters, it was a burden of appearances. For the servants, it was endless labor. Purple wove both chains and crowns, depending on whose shoulders it rested on. You pause before your straw mat eyelids, heavy body sore, and you replay the sight of those shimmering hems in the lamplight. Part of you scoffs, what a ridiculous thing to stake power on snail dye. Another part admits the shimmer was beautiful, hypnotic, almost otherworldly. And maybe that's the secret. Rome's power didn't just rest on armies or laws. It rested on illusions woven into fabric illusions so dazzling, even you, bone-tired and bitter, couldn't help but be moved. The household fades behind you, and now you're sent out into the guts of the city itself, where purple still lingers less in rich folds and more in whispers of what it represents. Here, the grandeur of Rome gleams on the surface, marble temples, arches, fountains, spilling water like veins of luxury through the streets. But beneath it, you see the muck, the labor, the sweat of thousands who keep it functioning. And you're part of it. You step from the villa into narrow cobbled alleys. Shoulders hunched, a jug of water balanced against your hip. You start with buckets, because that's how Rome breathes. Aqueducts carry streams of water into the city, yes, but the final stretch, the hauling, the filling, the pouring, that rests on backs like yours. Amphorae are heavy, they're clay, rough against your skin, and every trip leaves your tunic soaked from splashes. You trudge from fountain to household, from household back to fountain, repeating the motion until your shoulders burn. Citizens frown if you spill too much, though not one of them thanks you when their cistern fills. You notice purple occasionally, a senator sweeping by with attendants, holding his cloak, a woman's mantle trimmed in violet. But you keep your eyes low. That dye doesn't lighten your load. Mainstream fact, Rome's aqueducts truly were marvels stretching miles across valleys, their arches still standing centuries later. They delivered millions of gallons of water daily, but the last mile was labor done by slaves. The fountains didn't magically distribute water evenly. Someone carried it sweating and stumbling. That someone was you. The cobbled streets bring another duty refuse. Rome has no tidy carts, no polite barrels. Instead, trash collects in heaps, broken pots, spoiled food, even dead animals dumped into gutters. You and others shovel it into baskets and haul it beyond the walls. The stench clings to your hair, your skin, your very breath. Children sometimes jeer, wrinkling their noses as you pass calling names. You ignore them, teeth clenched. Survival requires silence. Quirky tidbit archaeologists have found Roman curse tablets, thin sheets of lead etched with angry prayers, tossed into drains so the gods, or maybe underworld spirits, would carry the complaint onward. You've seen them too, half buried in muck-scratched names, pleas for vengeance, odd little hexes. To you, they're just another piece of trash clogging the flow. You scrape them loose, wondering if Pluto down in Hades rolls his eyes at this flood of petty grievances. Historians still argue whether Rome had anything like organized sanitation crews, or whether slaves like you simply did it piecemeal. Some inscriptions suggest dedicated teams existed, while others imply every household dumped duties on their enslaved. You know the truth from your aching arms either way. It fell on the lowest backs. And then there are the sewers. Cloaca Maxima, they call it, the Great Drain. Politicians brag about it. Poets sing its praises as proof of Roman ingenuity. But inside you see none of that glory. You crouch under low arches, a torch sputtering in damp air, scraping muck from channels where water crawls sluggish and foul. Rats scatter at your approach, eyes glinting in the dark. The walls' sweat slime drips, and your skin crawls with every step. The rush of water carries refuse excrement, even corpses of vermin swirling toward the Tiber. When you finally emerge into daylight, blinking and reeking, other slaves edge away from you. Even in a world where stink is common, you carry it like a curse. You think again of purple so bright and perfumed in villas, and laugh bitterly. Here in the sewers, no dye matters. Every color is swallowed by muck. At midday, your arms quiver with fatigue. You pause at a fountain, stealing a sip from the spout, though technically forbidden. The water tastes metallic, but it's glorious against your parched throat. A pigeon struts along the rim, puffed and smug, cooing as though mocking you. You mutter, "Trade places." The bird flaps away, unimpressed. Quirky tidbit: some Romans swore that tossing beans into streets during festivals warded off restless spirits. You once saw senators solemnly scattering them, while children scrambled gleefully to snatch them up. You thought of it again when shoveling trash, later beans rotting among fish guts and pottery shards. So much for keeping spirits away. Maybe the ghosts just laughed. Historians still argue whether slaves in these roles ever gained specialized knowledge, fixing pipes, reinforcing drains. Some suggest they became early engineers indispensable in crises. Others believe they stayed invisible, faceless labor in an endless cycle. You balancing a leaking amphora as it drips down your back know how little recognition comes with the skill. Even when you patch a crack cleverly, no one notices unless it fails. Then, of course, you're blamed. By evening, the city blazes with torches. The festival yesterday still lingers in your bones, and tonight, the chaos hasn't lessened. Fires burn piles of trash outside the gates, smoke mixing with stench until the air itself feels heavy. You watch carefully, making sure sparks don't leap to nearby shacks. The citizens who boast about Rome's cleanest city in the world don't mention this: the choking air, the sweat on your brow, as you stand guard against flames. You remember hearing a senator praise the drains as the veins of civilization. You almost laughed. Veins of filth, you thought. Veins scrubbed by unseen hands like yours. Rome admires its marble facades, its grand arches. No one admires the body bent double in a sewer with a shovel. Still, even amid the filth moments of absurdity, lighten your load. Once a fellow slave slipped on muck and splattered himself head to toe. You both laughed until tears ran the overseer, glaring. Another time you found a cursed tablet, so ridiculous someone begging the gods to punish a neighbor's donkey for braying too loudly that you chuckled all day, repeating the words under your breath. The muck didn't change, but humor carried you a few steps further. Night deepens. You drag yourself back through alleys, sweat and grime clinging like armor you never asked for. When you finally reach the villa, the marble walls glow faintly in lamplight, pristine, as though untouched by the city's guts. You know better. The gleam survives only because hands like yours scrub the muck away, unseen, unpraised. You collapse onto your mat in the quarters, muscles twitching. Tomorrow the cycle repeats, buckets filled, trash, shoveled, sewers scraped. The irony stings. Senators boast of Rome's cleanliness, its aqueducts, its drains, while you choke on the proof of it. They measure glory in arches. You measure it in blisters. And yet, as sleep takes you, you think of one more irony. Rome prides itself on purple dye, the color of emperors, the shimmer of wealth. But the real color of Rome, the one you live, breathe, wade through, is brown. Brown of muck, of sweat, of endless dirt under your nails. Purple might define the image, but brown sustains the reality. You laugh softly into your straw, the bitter humor of someone who knows the empire's prettiest illusions are propped up by the filthiest hands. The roar hits you before you even see the walls. It rolls over the rooftops like thunder. A tidal wave of voices, cheering, jeering, laughing, gasping in unison. You know this sound now, it's the amphitheater. Rome's second heartbeat, louder than the markets, stronger than the temple bells, more relentless than the aqueducts. Citizens thrill in it, revel in the sheer noise of spectacle. You, however, are just another shadow in its bowels, another invisible figure in the machinery that keeps it running. You step closer. Jug balanced on your hip eyes, down the rumble of voices vibrating in your chest like drums. Inside the structure is staggering. Tier after tier of stone arcs, skyward seating stacked like waves, all pressing in around the wide sandy arena at the center. Bright awnings stretch overhead, casting red and saffron hues against the sunlight, shading the wealthiest citizens reclining below. The air is a stew dust kicked up by feet, sweat dripping from bodies roasting meat, hawked by vendors at the edges. The whole place smells of excitement chaos and the faint metallic tang of blood. Your task here is simple, or so the masters say. Serve. Carry amphorae of wine. Fetch cloaks when the air turns chilly. Distribute bread. Sweep spilled garum before it stains. Simple on paper, but in reality, it's a dance of invisibility. You must move quickly, but not obtrusively, pass close enough to be useful, but never block the view. A senator does not want to notice your hands refilling his cup. He only wants to notice that it never empties. Mainstream fact historians have confirmed that amphitheaters weren't just entertainment. They were social glue spectacles that reinforced Rome's dominance by staging combat hunts and plays in front of tens of thousands. Some emperors used them as tools of politics, buying loyalty with bread and circuses. But you don't feel the politics. You feel the weight of the amphora digging into your shoulder. You weave through stairways narrow and steep, balancing jugs, dodging feet that stretch lazily across the stone. Voices surround you. Cheers for a sword. Thrust groans when a shield blocks the blow laughter at some half-drunk joke about a gladiator's clumsy footwork. You glimpse the arena through gaps as you pass two men locked in combat, one lunging with a spear, the other raising his shield. Dust sprays up, the crowd roars, and for a heartbeat, you feel awe. But the amphora tips, wine sloshes dangerously, and awe vanishes. You keep your eyes down. Spilling on a senator's toga would cost you far more than embarrassment. Spectators wave at you impatiently. More wine bred quickly. You hurry, kneeling, pouring, bowing. Their conversation floats above your head. That one won't last another round. 2 denarii say the lion gets him. Death wagered as casually as dice games. You pass the bread silently, your hands sticky with honeyed crumbs, and melt back into the shadows. Quirky tidbit like today's stadiums selling popcorn and hot dogs. Ancient vendors sold sausages, olives, and chickpea cakes right in the stands. You once overheard a child begging for sweets while his father shouted for more blood. Bread circus and snacks, a complete Roman day out. You almost smirked at the absurdity, imagining someone juggling sausages and amphorae through a crowd this size. Behind the scenes, chaos is louder still. Slaves drag carcasses of animals from the morning's hunts, scraping bloodied sand to prepare for the next spectacle. Others haul heavy props nets. Spears, even wooden contraptions, designed to release wild beasts through trapdoors. The smell of iron and animal musk chokes the corridor's torches, sputtering against damp stone walls. You hear the muffled roar of a lion waiting in its cage, pacing claws scratching against wood. The crowd above gasps at the fight, but here below you taste its cost. Historians still argue whether amphitheater staff were specialized trained crews who knew the mechanics and routines, or just general slaves rotated into whatever task was needed. Some inscriptions hint at lifelong positions, men who became experts in spectacle logistics. Others suggest endless rotation, everyone shoved into chaos at least once. You sweating as you scrape spilled garum from the stair, lean toward the second. The work feels improvised, relentless, and endless. The air cools as evening edges closer, and with it comes another duty cloaks. wealthy guests shivering as the breeze slips under awnings summon you. You climb stairs until your thighs burn hauling bundles of wool. You spread them across shoulders with quick practiced hands. The amphitheater feels infinite, rows upon rows of people, their faces blurred together into a living wall of sound. You know none of them will remember your name. They might not even remember your face, but they'll remember that their shoulders didn't grow cold. You steal a glance back at the arena as you descend. A gladiator stands defiant, bloodied but proud sword raised. For a moment, something stirs in you a strange kinship. He fights under the same sun sweats, under the same sky, risks his body for others' pleasure. The difference? The crowd cheers for him. For you, there is no cheer, no glance, no recognition. Only the endless cycle of carrying and cleaning. The hours drag on. You refill cups until your arms tremble, sweep up broken pottery from dropped dishes, fetch cloaks until your back screams. The crowd clamors endlessly. More bread, more wine, more spectacle. Senators toss coins into the stands, laughing as commoners scramble like children. Bread and circuses, they call it. You call it exhaustion with a side of spilled garum. Then comes a roar unlike the others. A lion bursts from a trapdoor into the arena, mane wild teeth flashing. The crowd leaps to its feet, shrieking with awe. The gladiator braces spear, steady dust swirling. You freeze tray rattling in your hands. The lion charges claws gouging the sand, the air vibrating with its bellow. You look away not because you're uninterested, but because if the tray falls, you'll answer for it. Still, that roar stays in your ears long after the beast is dragged back into its cage. Quirky tidbit. Not all spectacles were gladiatorial. Some plays staged myths, complete with costumes and props, where condemned prisoners stood in for heroes and died for real. You once overheard whispers of a man forced to play Orpheus, torn apart by animals to mimic the myth. The crowd applauded the cleverness of the staging, never mind the reality. You shuddered quietly, sweeping up crumbs no one would remember. By nightfall, the crowd begins to trickle out voices hoarse from shouting. But your work is not done. The arena is wreckage sand, soaked with blood scraps of food under benches, shattered cups littering the tiers. You sweep scrape hall muscles, screaming. Torches flicker. Shadows stretch across the emptying stone. Rome's glory leaves its debris for you to clean. Historians still argue whether these games were truly entertainment or carefully engineered tools of control. The phrase, bread and circuses, survives as proof keep the masses fed and distracted, and they will not rebel. You dragging a bucket of bloodied sand through a corridor. Wonder if it applies to slaves as well. Were the games meant to distract you too, a reminder of Rome's total control? Obey, or you'll be the one in the sand. Finally, silence settles. The crowd is gone, torches dimmed. You slump onto a bench in the corridor tray, balanced limply on your knees, eyes heavy with exhaustion. The cheers still echo faintly. The lion's roar lingers in your bones, but the amphitheater itself is quiet now. Tomorrow the cycle will repeat bread wine cloaks, blood sand. For citizens' excitement. For you, monotony dressed up as spectacle. And yet even now, even here, you feel the strangeness of survival. You breathe, you stand, you carry on. Rome's empire is built on spectacle, but beneath it on backs like yours rests the true weight of its endless roaring machine. You notice absence more than presence now. In the quiet moments between errands, between sweeping up spilled wine or scrubbing out stains of garum, you realize the villa is full of everything except family. Or at least the kind of family you imagine free people enjoying. For the enslaved kinship is fragile. woven from threads that can be snapped at a master's whim or the market's appetite. And yet you cling to it anyway in scraps and stolen seconds, because even in chains, the human need for connection refuses to vanish. At night, you share a straw mat with others, pressed shoulder to shoulder, the scent of smoke and sweat pooling in the room. A child sleeps nearby, the son or daughter of slaves like you. No one knows how long the child will remain here tomorrow, next month, or next year they may be sold. Still, when they laugh, you find yourself smiling back, and when they clutch your sleeve and murmur mother or father, you don't correct them. Labels don't matter here. Affection is rare enough to welcome in whatever form it comes. Historians still argue whether Roman society encouraged these bonds or discouraged them outright. Some records show masters allowing marriages and even holding ceremonies, perhaps because ties made slaves more settled and less likely to flee. Other evidence reveals endless ruptures, children taken away, spouses sold apart, families dismantled like livestock. You know both can be true because you've lived the tension. You've seen bonds grow like grass between cracks in stone, and you've seen hands rip those bonds up roots and all leaving silence in their wake. You remember the day a friend vanished. One morning, you shared crusts of bread in the kitchen, murmuring half jokes to chase away fatigue. By evening, the traitor had taken them away. No warning, no farewell, just absence. Their child sobbed until their voice broke, clutching a carved wooden toy left behind. You tried to comfort them, though your own throat burned too much for words. That memory lingers sharper than whips or chains, not pain inflicted, but connection severed. Still kinship insists on sprouting. Two people share glances across a kitchen fire, hands brushing when no overseer is watching. An older woman tells bedtime stories to every child in the quarters, grandparent to them all, whether blood connects them or not. A small group shares bread equally, even if one has done less work that day, because hunger is universal and compassion is survival. These gestures stitch together something like family, an invisible fabric the masters cannot completely control. There are moments of sweetness among the ashes. A baby born in the villa, wrapped in scraps of linen, passed from weary hand to weary hand. Everyone coos, marveling at tiny fingers curled like buds. For an instant, the child is simply a child, not property, not asset. Innocence still glows in their skin. But you know the cruel truth. The infant is already inscribed in the ledger of ownership, their future circumscribed before their first word. Still in the flicker of lamplight, you rock them gently and hum a nonsense lullaby, pretending for one night that they are free. Quirky tidbit Romans, both free and enslaved, sometimes placed protective charms on their children. Wealthy households hung golden bullae around necks to ward off evil. For slaves, protection was rarely more than a careful eye or a hidden scrap of food. Yet sometimes you tie a string around a child's wrist, whispering that it is magic. They grin and believe you. And belief is protection of its own kind, however fragile. Your own memories blur. Did you once have a family before these walls? Faces flicker in your mind. Hands kneading bread, a sibling running across fields. Perhaps a father's low singing voice, but you can't be sure whether these belong to you or were borrowed from other stories. Slavery does that. It erodes certainty until even memory feels secondhand. Still, whether they are yours or someone else's, they anchor you. They remind you of what could exist outside the villa. Historians still argue whether enslaved people retained cultural traditions under Rome's yoke. Some say lullaby stories and rituals survived in whispers, passed through generations in hidden spaces. Others claim relentless labor erased all such traces. You lean toward the first. You've hummed a tune at night, one you can't place, but feels older than the marble around you. A melody half remembered, half imagined, yet it soothes a child who clings to your arm. And maybe that's enough proof traditions survive when they are needed most. The cruelty lies in how easily bonds are undone. You've watched mothers claw at the ground when their children were dragged away, their voices cracking into raw sound. You've seen men fall into silence for weeks after their wives were sold. Grief becomes a constant background hum in the quarters, not always loud, but always there, like smoke that lingers after a fire. And yet, you still form new attachments, because to live without them would be worse. Small gestures become monuments of resilience. You carve tokens from scraps of wood, tiny animals, or simple shapes to give to children. You trade jokes at night, whispering imitations of the master's pompous voice until laughter shakes the straw. You sit shoulder to shoulder, sharing body heat when the air grows cold, because warmth is both practical and comforting. You call one another brother or sister, knowing it isn't literal, but feeling that it is true. The masters may own your bodies, but they cannot extinguish your urge for kinship. The irony stings. Roman masters prided themselves on family as the cornerstone of virtue. They commissioned marble busts of ancestors, carved names into stone, praised loyalty and lineage at banquets. Yet these same men sold your friends, split your bonds, severed your ties without hesitation. They toasted family while dismantling yours. Sometimes you almost laugh at the hypocrisy, though the laugh tastes bitter. Evenings bring fleeting peace. A small fire flickers in the corner of the quarters, its smoke curling upward. You sit with others passing crusts of bread. A child leans against your arm and asks for a story. You speak softly, weaving a picture of a land with endless fields, rivers that shimmer without walls, skies that stretch free and open. The child's eyes droop, their breathing slows. For a moment, you believe your own story. Historians still argue whether such tales were seeds of rebellion or mere survival tactics. Did they inspire hope of revolt? Or did they soothe children into acceptance? Perhaps both. You don't know, and perhaps it doesn't matter. Speaking the words eases your chest, if only for a night, and so family persists in fragments. A lullaby here, a shared crust there, a hand clasped briefly when no one is watching. The bonds are not whole, not permanent, but they exist. They remind you that you are still human, even when the system insists otherwise. Tomorrow someone may be sold. Tomorrow another child may cry into the night. Tomorrow your own memory may blur further. But tonight, in the hush of the quarters, a small hand curls into yours, and you think family exists even here, even now. The festival's drums may still echo faintly in your skull, but here in the dim quiet, another rhythm rises. The rhythm of breath, of whispered laughter, of soft lullabies. It's not freedom, but it's a tether. It's the thread that pulls you through the repetition of days. And that thread, however fragile, holds strong enough to keep you anchored for another morning. You wake not to the whip's crack or the overseer's bark, but to the soft scrape of stylus on wax. The sound is delicate, rhythmic chalk against slate words, etched into silence. Today, your labor isn't fields or kitchens or drains. Today, it's indoors, within cool walls, lined with scrolls, where your task is not to haul or scrub, but to teach. Knowledge here is both tool and tether. Rome prizes wisdom, but only when it serves the free. So you hold scrolls instead of plows, numbers instead of baskets, lessons instead of shovels. And yet the chain still lies across your shoulders. The master's son slouches on a carved wooden bench, eyes drooping with boredom. You guide him through Homer, urging him to repeat the lines. His voice falters, stumbling over syllables, his accent heavy, his tone indifferent. You nod, encouraging him, even though irritation prickles in your chest. For if he succeeds, the master praises you. If he fails, the blame may still fall on you. The irony is almost too much. His laziness could bring you punishment, while his triumph brings you none of the reward. You keep your voice steady, masking the tension in your gut. Historians still argue whether literate slaves enjoyed enviable privilege or heightened danger. Some accounts describe them as elevated managing accounts, overseeing estates, even holding influence over their households. Others emphasize the fragility of their position, resented for their intellect, and distrusted for the same. You feel the paradox with every breath. A scroll in your hand is a crown, and a shackle respect and contempt braided tightly together. Your day flows in endless repetitions, no less exhausting than field work. You copy lines onto wax tablets until your wrist aches, repeating the same verse until its meaning dissolves into sound. You recite aloud again and again until words become a chant you could speak in your sleep. You calculate shipments of grain and amphorae of oil numbers stacked like stones in your mind. It is labor of the intellect, but labor nonetheless, and its chains pressed just as firmly as iron. Still small flickers of humor sneak through the cracks. The boy misquotes Homer, inserting words that warp the rhythm, and you murmur dryly, "Perhaps the poet said it better." His face twists in annoyance, while his sister, peeking from behind the doorway, covers her mouth to stifle a laugh. You allow yourself a faint smile. Even in repetition, even under watchful eyes, mischief has its place. A quirky tidbit slips into your thoughts. Romans believed owls were omens of doom, their hoots forecasting death. You once whispered this to the children, and their eyes grew wide as dinner plates. For days, every rustle in the courtyard made them jump, convinced it was a feathered herald of disaster. You chuckled quietly, then amused by how fear could spread even among the privileged. It reminded you that dread is universal, not only the property of the enslaved. By midday, the work shifts from poetry to numbers. You unroll scrolls heavy with estate accounts, lists of olives harvested, jars of wine, stored sacks of grain counted. You mark with your stylus, careful with each digit. For a single error could bloom into accusation. Theft, incompetence, deceit, charges that weigh heavier when you have no defense. You double-check columns until the symbols blur before your eyes sweat prickling, as if each tally were a whip raised above your head. Precision is not just habit. It is survival. Historians still argue whether literate slaves bent knowledge into tools of resistance. Did they slip secret words into documents, forge papers to aid escape-hide records to embarrass masters? Some scholars think so. Others insist the risks outweighed the possibility. You imagine it sometimes as you scrape letters onto wax, smuggling your name between the lines of a poem, inscribing a plea for freedom inside a column of grain tallies. But imagination is as far as you dare. One mistaken mark could condemn you. Coded rebellion is tempting, but the cost looms larger than the thrill. Afternoon lessons begin anew this time with both children hunched over tablets. Their hands are clumsy ink blotting across their letters. You guide them gently, correcting with patience, though inside you wonder at the injustice they must be coaxed toward knowledge, while you hoard it like treasure. Their yawns remind you that education is a right for them, a chore to shrug away. For you, it is both chain and sanctuary, a realm where even brief glances at text remind you of worlds wider than these walls. You pause at the window gaze, drifting toward the courtyard. Outside, workers haul baskets of olives, their muscles taut under the midday sun. For a fleeting moment, you envy them. Their bodies strain, but their labor ends with twilight. Yours stretches into night, when lamps burn low and you still scratch letters into scrolls, vision blurring. Knowledge, for all its dignity, offers little rest. Evening brings performance. The master expects poetry with his supper, so you stand at the edge of the triclinium scroll unfurled and recite. Your voice flows like honeyed water lines, carrying over the clink of goblets and the murmur of conversation. Guests nod pleased at the refinement of their host, the prestige of culture at his table. They applaud the poet, they admire the master. You remain a conduit, a living mouthpiece, invisible, even as your words ripple through the air. The irony is heavy. Rome boasts of its reverence for Greek philosophy, yet many who teach it are enslaved. Greeks themselves captured, sold, repurposed as tutors and scribes. Wisdom stripped of its freedom becomes ornament for the powerful. You think of it as you recite Aristotle's musings on virtue barefoot, on cold marble. Virtue is reserved for those who own, not those who serve. Yet not all moments are bitter. Sometimes late at night when the household sleeps and the lamps burn low, you read for yourself. Not for a master's ear, not for a child's sluggish repetition, but for your own hunger. A line about the sea, a reflection on justice, a verse of longing. The words bloom differently, then alive with resonance. For those quiet minutes, the scroll feels like yours alone, a key to a realm untouchable by chains. Historians still argue whether those private readings offered solace, or only sharpened the ache of captivity. Did words of freedom soothe, or did they salt the wound of knowing it was denied? Perhaps both. You bent over parchment with ink-stained fingers, feel the paradox like a pulse knowledge filling you, even as it reminds you of what you lack. When at last you extinguish the lamp, you return each scroll carefully to its niche, laying it down with reverence. You tuck away your stylus flex, your cramped fingers rub your eyes raw. Then you lie on your mat mind, still echoing with lines of poetry and tallies of grain. Tomorrow the cycle will repeat, teaching, copying, calculating, reciting. Words in place of whips, but repetition all the same. And as you drift, you murmur a line of Homer under your breath. You hum it like a lullaby, your voice so low it barely stirs the air. The words coil around you, both comfort and cage until sleep takes hold. Night comes with its own rhythm, one you already know by heart. The villa grows hushed, its painted walls swallowing the last notes of music, its masters curled in cushioned rooms where pillows are stuffed with feathers. But you, along with dozens of others, return to the servant quarters where straw mats spread across a cold floor stand in for comfort. You lower yourself carefully, body stiff from the day's duties, muscles still vibrating with aches, and feel brittle stalks of straw poke through your tunic. The smell is always the same damp sweat smoke, humanity pressed too close. It's not sleep that greets you, but the beginning of a nightly struggle for rest. The silence is never whole. A cough cracks the air. Someone sighs. Rats scuttle across corners where scraps have been forgotten. A baby lets out a thin cry before its mother soothes it with a whispered lullaby. You roll onto your side, pressing your head against your arm, and imagine silence not as absence, but as something gentler. Like lying under a river sounds muffled and stretched into something almost soothing. Almost, but not quite. Historians still argue whether slave quarters were separate dormitories or just cramped annexes. Barns, kitchens, storage lofts hastily repurposed. Some ruins show evidence of long, narrow chambers lined with simple bedding. Others suggest slaves simply slept wherever space was found. In your case, the room is windowless, its air heavy with smoke seeping from the kitchen hearth. The thought of fresh night wind is laughable. You breathe shallowly, as if restraint might make the air cleaner. Small rituals give shape to the night. You brush dust from your feet, fold your tunic neatly beside your mat, and tuck your tiny possessions close a scrap of cloth. Maybe a chipped wooden token carved in secret. Sometimes it's only a crumb of bread, saved from the day pressed carefully beneath fabric, so no one steals it. These gestures, tiny and fragile, are not luxuries but anchors. Small defiant acts of control in a life where nearly everything else is commanded. A quirky tidbit whispers into your mind, half remembered from a tutor's story. Romans believed that placing laurel leaves beneath a pillow could bring prophetic dreams. You smile faintly in the dark. You don't have laurel leaves. You have straw, moldy and rough in patches. Still, sometimes you pluck a stalk, lay it carefully beside your head, and pretend. If nothing else, it smells faintly of fields, fresher than the stale chamber you breathe in. Sleep is never simple. Some nights, exhaustion drags you under so fast, you hardly stir until dawn. Other nights, your mind races like a runaway chariot. Visions of overseers, the echo of whips, the weight of endless amphorae. You count breaths, shift position, sigh, whisper stories to yourself in the dark. Stories of fields that stretch wider than walls. Skies unmarred by stone rivers, carrying you farther than chains allow. In these imagined landscapes, you walk unshackled. Eventually, sleep steals you mid-sentence. Historians still argue whether enslaved people dreamt of freedom as rebellion or simply craved smaller comforts, warmer mats, fewer lashes, extra bread. Maybe both. You curled with knees tucked to your chest sometimes dream of grand revolt, sometimes only of softer bedding. Freedom wears many faces when seen from the edge of straw. Laughter sneaks in too. Night is the one safe space for whispers. Someone mutters a joke, someone imitates the master's pompous drawl or the overseer's swagger. Muffled giggles spread even as you all keep voices low. It's rebellion in miniature mockery, traded in the dark, invisible to the powerful. For a few minutes, your cramped chamber feels warmer, lighter, bound together, not just by chains, but by shared humor. Hours stretch punctuated by snores, coughs, and the rustle of restless limbs. At one point, a fellow slave rolls against you, their arm falling heavy across your chest. You don't push them away. The contact feels like solidarity, like proof you're not alone in the dark. Touch, even unthinking, carries comfort when words are too risky. But then, nightmares come. You jolt awake, heart-pounding straw clinging to sweat. Dreams twist into images of whips, cracking chains, tightening endless tasks piling higher than you can complete. You lie still trembling in the dark, listening to the even breathing of others until your pulse slows. By morning, no one mentions their nightmares. It's understood that you all have them. As the hours creep on, you begin to notice the chorus of the quarters. Breaths, snores, murmurs, the occasional cry from a child. You think of it as Rome's accidental lullaby, a song stitched together not by design but by exhaustion. It's not beautiful, but it's real, and it wraps around you more gently than any marble chamber or feather pillow could. Historians still argue whether cultural songs and lullabies from distant homelands survived in Roman quarters. Some evidence suggests fragments of Africa Greece Gaul lingered carried in melodies whispered across generations. Others claim the grind of servitude erased them. You've heard snatches of different tongues, lullabies whose words you don't know, but whose rhythms tug at something deeper. They weave together in the dark, creating a patchwork song that feels older than empire. You hum along quietly, even without knowing the language. It feels like a secret bridge across borders. Then come the whispers of rebellion. Someone mentions Spartacus, another mutters of revolts that rose and fell. Names slip through the dark like sparks, hope mixed with dread. You picture yourself marching chains, shattered torches, raised masters fleeing. And then another vision, crucifixions, lining the Appian Way bodies, hanging as warnings, Rome's final answer to defiance. Historians still argue whether such whispers bred courage or deepened despair. You feel both at once? Hope flares, then trembles, then hides itself in the straw. The night drags. You stir often, each time shifting against aches that never fade. Yet amid the discomfort, there's a strange resilience. You notice the small gestures of survival. A mother rocking her child, a man rubbing oil into his cracked palms, someone tucking away crumbs for tomorrow. You too cling to ritual, folding your tunic with care, humming faintly to yourself, whispering fragments of imagined fields and rivers. These actions seem so minor, but they are threads holding your humanity intact. Dawn, as always, comes too soon. First light creeps through the cracks, turning the chamber from black to gray. Someone coughs, someone mutters, others groan as they rise. Straw rustles as mats are abandoned, the rhythm of waking bodies blending with the shuffle of feet. You blink, stretch, groan your joints, stiff hair tangled with straw tunic, rank with sweat. And then, the sound that ends the night, the overseer's footsteps in the hall. The voice calls. Work waits, always. You rise, not because you want to, but because time pulls you forward like a current. The fragile rituals of night dissolve, instantly swept away by the tide of morning. And yet in the quiet of memory, you know those nights matter. They are fragile, imperfect, filled with laughter, nightmares, whispers, and ritual. They are not freedom, but they are where you feel most human. In the dim hush of quarters between straw and lullabies, survival takes its truest form. The masters will never count this resilience, but you know it beats steadily, night after night, until dawn comes again. Festivals are supposed to be joy. At least that's the story painted in frescoes and told in ode citizens crowned with flowers. Wine-flowing music, swelling like a tide that sweeps the whole city into delight. But for you and for others like you, festivals mean something else entirely. They're not pauses in your labor. They're amplifications of it. Twice the errands, twice the shouting, twice the mess. The only thing that multiplies faster than the noise is your exhaustion. The day begins long before dawn, when the sky is still pale gray and the birds aren't even chirping. You're shaken awake with orders to prepare the villa for celebration. Your limbs ache from yesterday's work, but there's no time to stretch, no pause to groan. Instead, you gather flowers, threading them into garlands with fingers already sticky from sap. The petals bruise under your hurried touch. If one garland breaks, you mutter a curse under your breath and start again. By the time the first rays of sun creep into the atrium, the villa must gleam tables, laid torches, polished couches draped with freshly laundered cloth. Your work must shine invisibly, so that the master's guests believe it all happened by magic. Historians still argue whether festivals were opportunities for slaves to find joy, or just more chains disguised with ribbons. Some accounts suggest households sometimes allowed their enslaved to join in feasting, a token act of generosity. Others dismiss it as symbolic. Most people in your place experienced only longer shifts, sharper scrutiny, and the risk of harsher punishment if anything went wrong. You know which feels true. Festivals are chaos disguised as leisure, and you are the one who keeps that disguise from tearing. By midday, the streets outside thrum with sound. Musicians play flutes and pound tambourines. Vendors shout about roasted nuts and honey cakes. Children squeal with delight at juggling acts and painted masks. You weave through the crowd carrying baskets of offerings bound for temples. Your body squeezed between dancers, merchants, revelers, already drunk on wine. The noise is overwhelming, a wall of sound that batters your ears until silence feels like a memory you once had but can't quite recall. Incense smoke swirls together with the smells of sweat and roasting meat so thick it makes you dizzy. A quirky tidbit from Roman superstition flickers into your mind. Some believed tossing beans into the street during festivals could ward off restless spirits. You've seen it with your own eyes, dignified senators scattering beans solemnly, while children scramble on hands and knees to snatch them up. The first time you nearly laughed aloud, wondering if ghosts or hungry bellies were the true beneficiaries. Even now, as you shoulder your baskets, the memory tickles you faintly. Rome is an empire of order, and yet its people throw beans to keep ghosts at bay. Back at the villa, the feast begins. Guests recline on couches, their voices loud with anticipation, while you shuffle in and out of the triclinium, carrying trays laden with food. Honey-glazed dormice platters of fish, still gleaming with oil figs, arranged in careful pyramids. Loaves of bread steaming as though the ovens were racing to keep pace. The tables groan beneath the excess, but you're the one who groans quietly under the weight of it all. You set down the dishes, wipe spills before they stain Dodge gesturing arms and sloshing goblets. The air smells of wine and garum sauce, layered so heavily that it clings to your tunic long after the meal ends. Historians still argue whether slaves often stole food during such banquets. Some records hint at a tolerated culture of petty theft, small bites taken quickly, a sip of discarded wine here and there. Others suggest fear of punishment kept most hands honest. You know the truth is messier. You've stolen once or twice a quick bite of bread in the kitchen, when no one looked a gulp of watered wine to soothe your throat. It's not rebellion, not luxury, just survival disguised as indulgence. The kind of theft that vanishes before anyone notices. As the sun dips low, the city grows even louder. Torches blaze, casting leaping shadows across walls as dancers whirl in painted masks. You carry jugs of wine through the streets, refilling amphorae, your back screaming under the constant weight. Music pounds from every direction, drums, pipes, clapping hands, until you can't tell where one tune ends and another begins. Children dart underfoot, shrieking with laughter, while drunken men belt off-key hymns to Bacchus, stumbling and spilling as they go. One quirky sight lingers with you, a procession featuring actors dressed as gods, painted and glittering in elaborate costumes. Once you saw a man painted blue to represent Neptune, staggering under the weight of a trident almost taller than himself. The crowd roared in delight, tossing flowers while you bit your tongue to keep from laughing at the god of the sea tripping over his own sandals. Rome may command the known world, but even its gods wobble on festival days. Nightfall doesn't soften the work. If anything, the chaos sharpens. Revelers stagger through the streets, shouting, singing, sometimes fighting. You trail behind with broom and basket, sweeping petals, clearing toppled baskets, dragging away the carcass of a sacrificed bull. The smell of blood mingles with flower petals until your stomach churns. Drums echo in your skull long after the musicians pass. Historians still argue whether festivals blurred social lines, whether in the throng slaves and citizens mingled in something like fleeting equality. Saturnalia, for instance, supposedly inverted roles, masters serving their slaves for a day. But most agree it was more performance than truth, a spectacle that reinforced hierarchy rather than dismantled it. You've seen it yourself. A master might pour you a cup of wine during Saturnalia, but come morning, he still owns your body. Equality measured in hours is no equality at all. Back at the villa, the feast decays into drunkenness. Guests sprawl across couches, tunics stained with wine laughter slurred into half-coherent ramblings. You keep moving your feet, blistered, your arms trembling, your back bent under trays that seem heavier every hour. A guest beckons you over, pressing a half-empty cup into your hand with a drunken grin. Drink, he commands, generosity blurred with condescension. You sip, obedient, the sour wine burning your throat. He laughs, claps your back, and forgets you exist before you've even set the cup down. For him, it was a gift. For you, it was another command dressed as kindness. The night drags on, and you clean endlessly plates, crusted with honey goblets, sticky with residue crumbs, swept into piles. Petals brown at the edges of their once bright bloom. Guests drift away, leaving behind the wreckage of celebration, overturned stools. Broken cups, wine stains spreading like wounds across marble. Your hands are raw from scrubbing your eyelids heavy, but the rhythm of repetition carries you forward. You wipe, sweep, carry, return. At last, the villa quiets. The final lamp flickers out. The final garland is discarded. The final stain scrubbed until only marble shines back at you. You slump against a wall chest, heaving, every muscle screaming. For the citizens, the festival will be remembered as joy, a story of music and laughter and abundance. For you, it will remain in your bones as soreness in your nose, as the mingled smell of wine and sweat in your ears, as the pounding echo of drums. Festivals are not freedom. They are another cycle, another mask of Rome's glory stitched together by your unseen labor. And yet, if you're honest, there are moments that nearly glow. A child running past with petals tangled in their hair. A rhythm from a flute that makes your foot tap despite yourself. The smell of roasted nuts from a vendor so sweet, it almost erases the stench of the streets. These glimpses don't undo the chains, but they remind you, however faintly, that you're still alive. Tomorrow, of course, the streets will need sweeping again. The festival will be memory for the masters, but for you, it will stretch on in the endless repetition of labor. And so the cycle continues, louder, brighter, more exhausting, until the city falls asleep and you stumble back to your straw mat, hoping the silence will feel like peace. Night has fallen again, and with it comes the final rhythm of a cycle that never changes. The villa at last lies still. The laughter, the drunken songs, the clatter of goblets, and the ceaseless demands of the festival are gone, replaced by the heavy quiet of sleeping masters. Their rooms are cushioned in silence, dreams softened by feather pillows and embroidered linens. You, by contrast, shuffle into the servants' quarters, body aching from the long day's clean-up arms, trembling from carrying trays that seem to grow heavier each hour. You lower yourself onto the straw mat that has shaped itself to your form through countless nights, and the brittle stalks poke at your skin like familiar thorns. Damp, rough, always faintly smelling of sweat, it is a bed only in the loosest sense, yet it is yours. The room fills with the rustle of others doing the same. A cough breaks the air, then a sigh, then the small scratch of a rat skittering across the corner. Silence in the quarters is never complete. It's stitched together from fragments and uneven quilt of noises that you learn to accept. You press your head into your arm eyes closed, trying to imagine that this soundscape is comfort, not absence. Perhaps you tell yourself it is like lying at the bottom of a river, the world's noise muffled into something slow and distant. If you lean into the thought just right, the scratches and sighs almost transform into a lullaby. Almost. Historians still argue whether slaves in Rome ever slept soundly, or whether fear haunted them even in rest. Some accounts suggest exhaustion was so overwhelming that you'd collapse instantly, your body dragging you into dreamless dark, no matter the circumstances. Others point to the constant anxiety of punishment, of sudden sales of whispered rumors of revolt that could jolt you awake at every creak in the floorboards. You know both are true. Some nights you plunge into slumber so deep that dawn surprises you as though time skipped forward. Other nights you stir at the faintest groan of wood-heart racing with the phantom thought that someone has come to summon you back to labor. Dreams are a mixed gift. Sometimes they return you to fields outside Rome, to laughter and faces you think you once knew, though they blur the moment you wake. Other nights, they twist into nightmares' chains, tightening around your chest. Overseers shouting endless tasks, piling faster than your hands can move. You wake with your heart hammering straw clinging to your tunic skin, slick with sweat. On those nights, you force your eyes shut again quickly, desperate to chase back the gentler dream before it dissolves entirely. Here's a quirky tidbit that sneaks into your tired thoughts. Romans believed that dreams occurring just before dawn could predict the future. Imagine that. If that belief held true, your endless dreams of hauling amphorae might simply be divine prophecy that you'll haul more amphorae tomorrow. Which, let's face it, is a prediction so accurate it almost feels like satire. If dream readers were right, then your destiny is already carved out in straw and sweat. Yet within the sameness, small rituals persist, anchoring you against the tide of monotony. A woman in the corner hums softly as she rocks her child to sleep the melody, wrapping gently around the cramped space. A man massages oil into his cracked hands, muttering that it eases the pain from carrying baskets all day. You, as always, tuck your few possessions close before sleep, your worn tunic folded neatly, a scrap of cloth smoothed beneath it, and a small carved token you keep hidden from prying eyes. These gestures don't change your chains, but they shape the night into something survivable, and sometimes whispers spark like embers in the dark. Rumors slip into the quarters when overseers aren't listening, names like Spartacus, stories of rebellion, tales of entire armies of the enslaved rising against Rome. You hear them with bated breath, half hopeful, half fearful. In your mind, you picture chains, shattered masters, fleeing the world turned upside down. Then another vision intrudes, crucifixions lining the Appian Way, bodies nailed as warnings to any who dream too loudly. Historians still argue whether such rumors stirred courage or merely deepened despair. To you, they do both at once. You smile faintly in the dark heart, trembling, and press your face into the straw to hide your reaction. The night stretches on a slow crawl of hours, marked not by clocks, but by shifting breaths. You drift in and out of sleep, stirred by the occasional cough murmur or rustle of straw as someone turns over. In those intervals, you come to think of this chorus as Rome's second lullaby, rough, uneven, stitched from exhaustion rather than music, but soothing in its way. It is not beautiful, but it is real. It cradles you more gently than the silence of marble halls ever could. Historians still argue whether slaves retained fragments of their cultural songs within Rome's households, whether lullabies and chants traveled across seas and survived in whispers. You've heard them snatches in tongues you don't recognize, melodies unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. Perhaps they are remnants of Africa, of Greece, of Gaul, each thread woven into the night's patchwork of sound. Here in the dark, they merge into something larger than Rome itself, a song that transcends the borders that enslaved you. Sometimes you hum along quietly, even when you don't know the words, letting the tune carry you into sleep. And inevitably, dawn arrives. First comes the faintest gray light creeping through cracks in the shutters. Then the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing in the hall. The overseer's voice cuts through the quarters, summoning, commanding. You blink, stretch grown joints stiff from the straw mat. Bits of stalk cling to your hair. Your tunic smells of sweat and smoke. Your limbs ache as if weighted with stone. You rise anyway, because that is the rhythm, another day, another cycle time, dragging you forward, whether you choose it or not. And so these silent nights, imperfect though they are, become the fragile heartbeat of your existence. The days belong to labor and fear, but the nights, thin, fleeting, fragile, are where you almost feel human again. In them, you dream even if the dream is only straw turning into laurel leaves or whispers of freedom rising in songs you don't understand. The masters may never know it, but in the darkness, you piece together fragments of yourself that labor alone could never erase. You gather your things, your tunic folded, your token tucked carefully away, and step into dawn. The silence fades with the rising sun, and the cycle begins again, its repetition grinding yet strangely steady. The empire marches forward on chains and songs alike, and you caught between both, carry yourself into another day. And now, as the story drifts to its end, the noise of Rome, the whip cracks the shouting crowds. The endless shuffle of chores fades like an echo moving further down a long corridor. What remains is only the softness of breath, the slow rhythm of your chest, rising and falling, the quiet pulse of being here still. You close your eyes and picture not straw mats or stone floors, but a meadow at dusk. The earth beneath you is warm, the grass bends gently, and the sky stretches wide and endless above. A breeze slips past, carrying the scent of water and flowers, so faint and soothing, it feels like it belongs to another world. There are no overseers here, no commands, no endless lists of tasks. Just stillness broken only by the murmur of a stream somewhere nearby, and the chorus of crickets easing you further into calm. Each inhale is lighter than the last, each exhale carrying away the weight of the day. Muscles unclench, thoughts soften, and the mind finally loosens its grip on the endless repetitions that carried you through. You are not hauling, not counting, not obeying. You are simply resting, a body allowed to be still, a mind allowed to wander without fear. Perhaps you imagine faint music drifting on the air, not from flutes or drums, but from voices humming low lullabies, fragments of many songs weaving into one. They circle you like a gentle blanket, keeping you safe in the dark. You sink into the sound, let it hold you. Let it carry you toward the edges of sleep. So let the night close in soft and steady. Let the silence cradle you. And as your breath slows, remember you've survived another day, and now you can surrender to rest.